Okay, I think we're going to get started. All right, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Assembly Public Safety Committee. It is September 6th at 11 a.m. Will you please call roll?
Ms. Brawley? Here. Ms. Bronga?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Cross?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Martinez?
Right.
Mr. Myers?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Sult?
Here.
Mr. Voland?
Here.
And Ms. Salatel?
Okay, welcome everyone. Just as a reminder, as we move forward, if you want to get in the queue, just let me know. Or if I don't think we have anybody on the phone. Do we have anybody on the phone at this point? Oh, sorry. Yes, Mr. Martinez, Ms. Salatel. Okay, just send me a text if you want to get into the queue. We are, I believe, as normal, we're going to start with APD. If you guys want to come up. All right, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's start off with body cam update. We are on track with have nothing really new to report. Municipality as a whole is continuing to move forward. We've done our policy training. Our hardware training will come a little closer to deployment. So no obstacles. So that's good news.
So sorry. So maybe you could just give us a little bit more specifics. I'm curious about the equipment, the training, the ordering, the sort of the and if there's been any change in terms of timeline. I think you talked about this before, but when can we expect them out on the street? When can we expect the training to be done and for us to be able to see them and actually on all officers at this point?
Third quarter this year is when we will start deploying. It's going to be body cam and dash cam at the same time. They're all connected together. Mm-hmm. And just the way that rolls out, we're probably just going to continuously be adding them to the cars. And I know we've been saying we'll do 30 and try it for 30 days, but essentially it's going to kind of just be rolling out continuously because some of the equipment in the vehicle is a collaborative effort with Radio Shop because I have to install some stuff.
Great. I think we'll probably have some questions. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. Third quarter calendar year.
Yes, calendar.
So like
fourth quarter, Q4 this year.
Okay, Q4.
Yes.
I think
end of this year.
Third quarter. Okay.
Sorry.
Fourth quarter. Great. Thanks. That's what I need to understand.
Great. Any other questions on body cams from members? Yes, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions, and I might have missed this from a prior meeting that I didn't attend. Do we already have the body-worn cameras in the municipality already?
No, they are all scheduled to be delivered in fourth quarter. That's dash cam, body cams, and the cameras for our interview rooms, our 8 interview rooms.
So I guess let me divvy up that question. The 30 that we're doing for the test, are those already in the municipality?
No, we'll have all of them at the same time. So we're not getting like 30 and then waiting to get we're ordering them all in a bundle. And Axon was nice enough to put us in the queue even before the contract was signed so we didn't have further delays.
Got it. And then second question I have is, could you just describe for the 30 for the test, who the officers are? Is there like a specific category that's going to be part of that test group?
So we're going to take, the plan was to take some volunteers on patrol, most contact with the public. I would say probably 80 to 90% of patrol officers want to volunteer for the program, which is great news. So we'll just probably randomly select some folks on each shift. So we have 24-hour coverage and we make sure that the officers with the most coverage are wearing them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the concerns that I am hearing from the community is they want a little bit more of an idea of a timeline for full implementation. Does APD currently have a goal, in terms of timeline to get from the 30 pilot to full implementation where all, I guess, sworn officers on duty would be wearing body cameras?
So there's no, and the reason is because the equipment going in the vehicles is dependent upon the radio shop, and so Axon will send up techs to train the radio shop on how to install some of the equipment, and the radio shop is given like a rough estimate of what they think they can do just by their own research. But until the techs get here and actually train them on how to do it, they can't give a real estimate. So once Axon comes and trains them, they'll be able to say how many vehicles they can upfit, per day or per week or per month.
Can I follow up? When are they coming up? Is Axon, that's the software provider that integrates all of those cameras. Do they have a trip scheduled currently?
They have a tentative trip scheduled by month. Next meeting, I'll probably be able to give you that date.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Cross.
Yeah, my question kind of ties into the next subject, and which is since a majority of our fleet is outdated, and I hope that we make intentional plans to update many of these vehicles. Is there a thought process as to putting the body cams, since there's an expense involved with equipping these vehicles, maybe we focus on those that already have newer vehicles and make those our priority, so that we're not equipping vehicles that are getting ready to be replaced and have additional cost and burden or potential damage to equipment of installing it and then tearing out and reinstalling it. And so has there been any conversation regarding perhaps which vehicles might be the most appropriate fit for our new hardware?
Yeah, the vehicles that were delivered this year. So we've had a batch of vehicles that were upfitted and we placed officers in those vehicles. And then we have another 9 vehicles coming in, hopefully in the next 30 days. None of those vehicles were upfitted with dash cams, so we didn't have to put them in, take them out. So those vehicles will obviously get the new technology. And then, we'll make a coordinated effort so that the vehicles we know we're going to be replacing as we get new vehicles in will be last in line, so we don't have to waste the time.
Yeah, thanks.
ahead.
I just think that Mr. Volin suggested that Axon was the software provider. I think they're both software and hardware, right? We just have one vendor.
That's correct.
Thanks.
So I don't see any other questions. Just before we move on, I'm curious about the sort of public communication as this rolls out. I think there's been a lot of interest, obviously, in this, and so I'm curious your thoughts about over the course of time when they arrive, training begins, they get out on the street. What's your thoughts about in terms of how we're communicating with the public about this? Is there a plan to do that at all? Is my first question. And the second is, how is this changing interactions with the public? Will the public expect anything different than they're experiencing now that we have these cameras that we're using?
So with the first part of your question, some of you know me, I'm a little bit more of an oversharer. So when these boxes come in, you're probably going to see some social media, photos, videos, and things being pushed out. We know that there's some anticipation within the community. And so as these things kind of roll in and the steps that are happening, we're probably going to put some information out as that's happening. And as the timeline becomes more solid, we'll also put that information out. Next month, we hope to have exact dates for things that we'll probably push out with this body first and then start to go public outside of that. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is, I don't expect a different response, reaction, interaction level, or behavior change by officers. We have an extremely professional organization. And so I think our officers are going to behave exactly the same. And I think that the majority of the public, I expect them to have no adverse reaction. However, as I've said many times, we do embrace the right to privacy here. So I would anticipate that our officers are going to have some challenges with certain members of the community that maybe don't want officers coming in their homes with body cams activated. I have all the confidence in the world our officers will work through that.
Yeah, I would just say that I'm curious as it rolls out. As you're interacting with an officer, to have a camera pointed at me is not what I'm used to necessarily, and so I think there's going to be some adjustment there. So I'm curious as that rolls out. I'm hopeful you'll come back and share the learning that happens as a result of that. So thanks. You can move on to the next top topic. I think that's you have a presentation. Yes.
Correct. So for our fleet update, Captain Josh Nolder will be presenting the data. Amongst many wonderful things about Captain Nolder, vehicles is one of his passions. So he has a wealth of knowledge, and feel free to ask any questions you have.
Hello, everybody. So I just put together a pretty short slide presentation here for you of the overall of our fleet status. We have about 600 vehicles. There's a mixture in there of patrol vehicles, administrative vehicles, specialty vehicles. The vast majority of those are assigned to individual officers. We also have some fleet cars, fleet within a fleet. Those are the cars that get used when somebody's main vehicle is down. That's roughly about 10% of the fleet. You can see about 47% of those have over 100,000 miles. That number, 100,000, is sort of an industry number that's used in police fleets. 10 years, 100,000 miles, you generally want to be looking at replacing vehicles. And I'll get into why here in a moment. You can see even 16% of our vehicles have over 150,000. We do actually have some vehicles over 200,000. 56% over 10 years, back to that 10-year 100,000. The reason that you sort of see at 10 years, 100,000 miles, vehicles being retired, typically sold off in auction to then recoup some cost and put back into the MOA fleet budget, is because they lose a lot of value past a certain amount of time, and they become a lot more expensive to maintain. And sort of one of the things you don't want to have in a fleet is where you're costing more to keep the vehicle on the street than what it originally cost you to purchase it. And we have several examples of where our fleet is costing 2-3 times as much as it cost to originally purchase that vehicle, just to try to maintain. We also have something in police, in the police culture that's starting we're starting to realize that this is an issue for our vehicles, and that's the idle time. Everybody's seen police vehicles at crash scenes or collisions or anywhere that we have to have the bright overhead lights on. The vehicle's running at that time. We have quite a bit of idle time, obviously, just in the nature of doing our jobs. Well, every hour of idle time is equivalent to 30 miles per hour, or 30 miles of wear and tear on that vehicle. That's directly from the industry, Ford, GM, and those. So you add that to the actual miles that were done to the vehicle. And the example I provide is a vehicle just a little over 100,000 miles. It has 7,100, almost 7,200 idle hours. That's equivalent to 325,000 miles of use. So you can see that the vehicles, they're driven hard, right? The jobs that these vehicles do is extremely tough on a police vehicle. Even though they're designed for that, they're really not that much different than the civilian version of a vehicle. They'll have slightly better coolers, brakes, suspension, but in general, those vehicles are seeing very hard life. Because of that, our officers are spending an inordinate amount of time trying to find a vehicle when their vehicle goes down, and that keeps them off the street. I asked about a month ago for some just firsthand accounts of officers. I've got some of those details and some photographs. I wanted them to tell me what things they deal with. And there's a lot of accounts of them spending time trying to find a vehicle to drive to be able to go do their job, or en route to a call to include code runs, and the vehicle failing and having to pull off on the side of the road, which is not anything that any of us want to see in the city of Anchorage. We're first responders. We need to be there first. So obviously there's safety concerns for the high mileage. The wear, I've got photos, and they're in the very title page, of exposed metal in the seats just from wear. I don't know the mileage for some of these that the officers provided me photographs. Some of these vehicles probably have quite a bit of mileage, but we have vehicles. We have a 2014 Interceptor Explorer driven by a patrol sergeant that's got over 200,000 miles. So not even 10 years old. And again, breakdowns while en route to medic assist. I'll have to look. I can't see beyond Mr. Soltz. No, thank you. Based upon replacing 10% of the fleet in any given year, this 10 years, 100,000 miles or so, we would be talking about replacing about 57 vehicles per year. Again, roughly 10% of the fleet every year. So every 10 years, you would see the fleet completely rotate out. Now, there's some mix in there. There's some administrative vehicles, some specialty vehicles. That's not on that time calculation because they quite honestly, they see very little use. For instance, an incident command vehicle, it comes out in training or it comes out in really big call outs. We maintain those vehicles or MOA fleet maintains those vehicles. That's not what we're talking about with the 10 years, 100,000 miles. We used to be on a 10-year, 120,000 mile with MOA fleet. And about 15 years ago, their budget was almost $5 million. It was $4.6 million for just capital expenditures, buying vehicles for the entire fleet, the whole MOA fleet, with some exceptions. Fire's different, solid waste services, they get their own vehicles separately. Out of that 4.6, it was cut to 2.3 about 15 years ago. What I'm told, I didn't experience this, but what I was told by Fleet was that the promise that was coming back the following year. It's never come back. 15 years on, that 2.3 million is still the capital budget for the entire municipality to include the APD vehicles we purchased from. Obviously, everybody's experienced that a dollar in 15 years ago is not what a dollar's worth, 15 years later. So our buying power has severely diminished, even beyond what it was when it was nearly $5 million 15 years ago. As a consequence, our fleet that was 10 years, 120,000 miles, there is no year, there is no mileage cap. We are just really running these vehicles as no other, we have no other choice. Their MOA fleet is keeping them running, but now they spend far more time trying to get vehicles up to be able to be used than just maintaining vehicles, just doing oil changes and doing the preventative maintenance. And I think we have, I think we have about 70 vehicles right now being waited to be worked on by MOA fleet. And it's just perpetuating itself. The more time they spend to try to get vehicles back on the road so the officers have them, is less time they have to do the maintenance. And so that vehicle gets more use. It gets longer and longer intervals between maintenance. And as vehicles get older, parts are no longer available. A lot of people don't know this, but the manufacturers are not required to make parts after 10 years. So we have a pretty healthy portion of our fleet is Chevy Impalas. Well, the radiator for a lot of these Impalas is no longer made, depending upon the year. So MOA fleet is having a very difficult time trying to source things like radiators. Many of these vehicles are on their second transmission, second engine, and you can see how that winds up costing more money than to just replace the vehicle. That's the situation that we're currently in. If you can go to the next slide, please. So it's sort of a thing known within policing that it's this 10 years, 100,000 miles. That's actually the top. I recently had the opportunity to go to Police Fleet Expo in New Orleans just a little over a couple of weeks ago. A lot of them are quite less than this. The recommendations from fleet consultants that were there presenting was 6 years, 80,000 miles for police patrol vehicles. I'm not saying that we go there, but obviously the cost is very expensive to do something. We're asking to get back to a 10-year, 100,000, sort of that cap. Just for reference, AST, Department of Public Safety, they're at 4 to 5 years. 4 to 5 years, depending upon the function of the vehicle, that vehicle's replaced. So you can see in comparison, and I mean, different types of policing, but as long distance as they go, we wind up doing a lot more wear and tear on starting and stopping, and a lot of quick starts and quick stops. So equally difficult on vehicles in different ways. Again, we lose less, or we recoup less money when we try to go to auction. Currently, we're not in a place where we can even auction vehicles. We don't have enough of them. So MOA is just pouring money and time and labor into keeping the vehicles on the road for the officers. But if it were to go to auction, there's not enough money to recoup to put back into their coffers. With a life cycle, and I can get into that in a moment in another slide, you recoup money when the earlier you get rid of the vehicle to then put back into its replacement. I think I covered most of that. We can go on to the next slide. So this is an Excel sheet I got from MOA Fleet. These are just the top 6 vehicles that I could grab based upon mileage. You can see the usage is the mileage there to the right. The maintenance cost is up at the top, I have the cost of a 2009 Impala based on their records was about 27,000, and a 2012 Impala. And if you don't know this, the last number in an MOA vehicle denotes the year. So 5 out of 6 of those are 2009 Impalas, and there's that one in the middle that's a 12. So I have both costs there for you. You can see the maintenance cost is double and sometimes triple the original cost of these vehicles. And the hours, that's hours that are put on by the municipal fleet shops to maintain those vehicles. So you can see in a lot of these examples, they're doing 500, 600 hours worth of work poured into those vehicles also to keep them on the road. And you can see the mileage to the right. Now, we obviously have vehicles with less mileage than that, but again, to my earlier slide, it's nearly 50% of our vehicles are over 100,000 miles. Next slide, please. This is the fleet consultant group that presented at Police Fleet Expo this year. This is their bell curve for that initial cost and basically what your replacement and maintenance cost is. And what you don't want is the situation that we're currently in, where you have little to no value left in the vehicle and your costs to replace it and maintenance are just continuing to go up dramatically. And you can see really beyond that 5-year mark is where it precipitously drops in value and your costs really start to go up, especially in the maintenance. And so if you do our 10-year, we realize that we're still not optimal. Again, others do it sooner, but realistically speaking, 10 years and 100,000 miles would be far better than what we're currently doing. And this is the recommendation for one of the consultancy groups that was there. Next slide, please. So the results, again, the MOA fleet is spending more time. They need more bodies to be able to maintain these vehicles. They're having a hard enough time to fill positions they currently have open, but they would need more to be able to maintain an older fleet like this. They're less fuel efficient. Obviously, we know as vehicles get newer, they all get more fuel efficient. So we're spending a lot more money on fuel to keep these cars on the road than what a newer car would cost us. And obviously fuel is expensive for all of us right now. They do become unsafe. It's unsafe for the officers with exposed metal in these seats. I've got plenty of photographs that I could send around to you. This came from the police officers just in my ask for them to give me the examples of what they're riding in daily. And as well as the public. I mean, the public's, whether they're somebody that has been placed under arrest in the back seat or somebody we're giving a ride to or somebody that's doing a ride along or that we're responding to, these vehicles are out amongst the citizenry as well. Our response times, I don't have a number to give for you on this, but I have plenty of accounts of officers telling me that they couldn't find a vehicle for several hours of their shift when theirs broke down or caught on fire en route to a call and had to pull off on the side of the road. So we know that they're being taken off of the road. They're not being able to respond to calls as fast as we likely could. I don't know the exact number because it's a floating number, but there's an inordinate amount of our vehicles just currently waiting to be repaired. I think it's right around 70. That's a moving target. And the fleet folks are just overwhelmed. They're so below water on this that they're asking for something to change. And I'm not trying to be their voice, but I talk to them on a daily basis. I'm our voice, but they could use some help, as could we. Obviously, the wear on the fleet is continuing to accelerate because we're using the vehicles up as fast as we can get them back on the road. And then we're spending more money to maintain a fleet beyond its lifespan, its life cycle, than to actually purchase new vehicles. And there's a warranty piece to this. A lot of departments, a lot of fleets in general, government fleets, they don't go much beyond that initial warranty period. The 3 years or 5 years, depending upon what type of vehicle you're talking about, just because the cost then is borne on you to fix it. But again, 10 years, 100,000 is what we would like to get back to. And our fleet would be exponentially better than it is now. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm guessing you're going to have some questions. So
Okay.
let's start with Ms. Zalatel on the phone. Ms. Zalatel? Oh, let's start with Ms. Zalatel on the phone. Sorry, I need to use my mic.
Thank you. So thanks for the comprehensive presentation. I think I'm hearing the policy request, which is the 100,000 mile, 10-year marker What I would like to see, maybe at the next public safety committee meeting, and now is the time to do it as we move into budget season, is some proposals on how to best address this. This feels a little bit more akin to needing to keep technology up to date, where we've used the tax levy versus bonding, because it feels like we're always behind on bonding. But I don't know if fleet replacement would be an allowable use for such things. I'm also curious if there are any funding mechanisms out there, particularly federal funding, as we look to buy newer cars that are more fuel efficient, that could help offset the cost to the MOA. So just wanted to toss a few ideas out there that perhaps maybe you all could take some time to explore, and come back with ways that, kind of a menu of options that we could try to use to address the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Altell. Just before I move on, is that something that we can bring to the next public safety meeting? Can we bring a proposal? Can you bring a proposal forward for options? Is that a possibility?
We can definitely have a conversation about that next public safety meeting.
Okay, well, we can have it all offline and see what we want to do. Thanks. Okay, next in the queue, Mr. Volland.
Thank you. So speaking of fuel efficiency, first of all, I just want to acknowledge, we need to do better. I think these photos are pretty compelling, and the cost of maintenance versus replacement as well. With the fuel efficiency, are you looking at like hybrid vehicles, or is that not industry standard? Tell me a little bit about like what are the new developments as far as fuel efficiency for police vehicles?
Sure. So we were actually one of the first to adopt the Interceptor Explorer hybrids. I don't know the exact number, but I think we're right around 60 in our fleet. We wanted to give them a fair evaluation. I will tell you my personal opinion, and I don't want to speak for MOA Fleet, but I know their opinion. We're having a lot of problems with the batteries in the Fords, the hybrid batteries. It may be partly because of our weather. We're not entirely sure. I do believe that it's not just us, but we can't quite get that out of the manufacturer. We have routinely bought, since the Crown Vic days, we've routinely bought 6-cylinder vehicles. A lot of the vehicles that we're currently looking to purchase in the future that we would spec for our fleet will also be 6-cylinder. It's not that we wouldn't look at the hybrids again, but we think the manufacturer in that regard has some work to do to fix their battery issues.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Next in the queue, Ms. Ronga.
Okay, this is probably a dumb question, but so a lot of the patrol officers have 3 days off. Is there any automobile sharing? I know most people drive them home. Is there a way to do that so that there would be less vehicles needed, or?
So the DC probably can answer this better than I, but I think the short answer is they have take-home cars. It's a contractual thing. I don't know how we would seek to solve that by sharing vehicles. And one of the problems with sharing vehicles, what they call hot seating vehicles, is you wear out a vehicle even faster. A lot of the studies have shown home car programs actually. The only reason that we can do what we've been able to do to get cars to 200-something thousand and this old is because vehicles that are not hot seated are worn out. I mean, 3-4 years, because they're just running on the road all the time.
Yeah.
So the other thing that there's probably reason, but the idling, if it's cold, I can see idling for hours, but do you always idle even in the summer? Like at an accident, or is that necessary?
So when there's a lot of electrical load that's placed on those vehicles, not to mention the stuff that we put in them. The manufacturers try to do their best to be able to sustain, bigger alternators and that and batteries. But in general, when you see a vehicle on the side of the road with overheads on, that vehicle has to be running. Otherwise, it would pull the battery down to the point where we couldn't start the motor again. The winter is obviously a concern to keep it warm, especially when we have people in the vehicles, and not just our officers. But we also, and I've done this myself, also try to tell our people the vehicles are not to be sitting there idling for no reason unless it is again at a scene with the overheads on or the equipment needs, or somebody's in the vehicle and you're keeping them warm in the winter. The idle majority comes from this, the vehicle being used the way it's designed to be at scenes with those lights on and keeping the infrastructure. And we also have AEDs that have to be kept warm, the defibrillators. So we can always try to do better on idling, but the profession in general has idling built into the way that we use the vehicles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. Something that Ms. Alatal said, I just think it's time, I guess, to bring up a project. So I have been working, at least in the very initial stages with council, on the development of a parallel tax levy program to the information technology tax levy, which is the body cam levy, which would be specifically for APD fleet. And so what it would do is, instead of annually, we would have to bond or come up with other revenues, it would make a specific levy at kind of the sweet spot that would take care of this problem once and for all and make it a not issue so that it's just done. So the question is, from where I sit, whether that's something we try to put on the ballot for this year or next year. And I think the only hesitation I have for putting it on now is until we have body cameras. I have a feeling the public is going to have kind of mixed feelings about a new levy. And so that would argue for 2025. But that said, it could go either way. And I don't think it's actually all that complex of a ballot question because we have the template for the information technology special tax levy already done. So it's a project that's underway. It's just a project whose timeline is not yet certain.
Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, Chris, I like that thought. I also think that if the message is right in that, listen, we are trying to get the body cams out and we're outdated vehicles that have to be replaced, that it's costing us more money. And so by pushing this forward, we can actually expedite the body cams because we're equipping new vehicles that we're not going to have to tear them out in less than a year. So I think overall, if the message can be braided to the public, the genuine situation that we're in, it could be successful. The other thing I didn't see on here is it's very interesting. I'm just wondering if the age of our fleet has anything to do with recruiting. When I go to the fair, the troopers were there with this huge decked out 1-ton truck, right? That had all these bells and whistles and kids were climbing all over it. Fire department has, fire trucks that people are climbing on. The military has a Black Hawk helicopter and APD has a 2009 Impala. I guess I'm just kind of curious. Do you find that when you're recruiting and stuff, having nice equipment for those individuals is a retention factor when officers are looking at other ways they can serve? Thank you.
I can certainly say that the officers that we do have look at their vehicle that is their office as a point of pride. So there are some comments that I received from the officers that has negatively affected them in their decision as whether or not to stay a police officer at the Anchorage Police Department.
Thank you, Mr. Salt.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. Big advocate of this. I've often viewed this as just a math problem. There is a sweet spot, and by being beyond that sweet spot, we're wasting funds. But I really appreciate, as I've learned, we also have a public safety issue with response times and vehicles breaking down. Some things that you didn't mention, or maybe you did, and may just want to make a finer point on. My ride along that I went with an officer, we spent about 3 hours, maybe 4 hours swapping vehicles. So anytime an officer is waiting for repair, swapping a vehicle, that's a cost as a result of that maintenance or breakdown that you're not accounting for, which significantly adds to it, especially if it was a 2 or more person group. 1 hour of idle time is roughly 30 miles. That's general industry standard. And so what you're trying to balance is that auction sweet spot, the warranty spot, the maintenance cost, the operation cost, the capital cost, and also repair time. What people also need to understand is as these vehicles age, your repairs are now a new transmission. A new transmission takes a week. It's not changing a headlight that takes a few hours. So hence, when I went over to the shop talking to the repair techs, they're like, I I have all this work in front of me, but I'm only going to get, a vehicle a week out of the shop. So that really comes into play as well. So again, I think 10 years, 100,000 miles, again, it's a math problem. We manage at my other job over 200 vehicles, and we're starting to have enterprise manage this for us to tell us warranty, resale, and track all that data, because it gets pretty complicated. I would like to ask if we could have a work session at some point over at APD. No hurry, because I think if you haven't been there to Fairbanks Street by the old Midtown Alaska Alaska Club, thank you. You'll see the fleet sitting there, and I think some of the vehicles have been sitting there over a year, new vehicles waiting for their upfit. And last comment, something that we do is, and we've done other roles, is APD would get the best and brightest of the vehicles. And then as you run through them, they would go to other departments or resale, but other departments who don't need the criticality of it, the reliability, don't you put the hours on it, the miles on it. There's probably several vehicles around town that muni vehicles are just sitting there and they're used on occasion. That could be an older vehicle. That can be a vehicle with 100,000 miles or more easily. If it breaks down, it's not life and health and safety. So thank you.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate all the discussion about math and operations. It's interesting. It is an interesting problem. Two questions I had. You mentioned that other, what the industry standard is as far as replacement. And I was curious if there's a comparison between basically the coverage area or the average number of miles driven in Anchorage versus other communities. And, thinking maybe other places there's smaller beats or, basically how much does our spread out land use of this community impact the amount of miles you drive, and how do we compare that to other cities?
So I think the standard, and when I say it's a standard, it's not a hard rule. A lot of places are less than this. It really comes down to sort of that happy medium, right? That's why it's the 10 years or 100,000 miles that generally they go for, because some places, and this is true with the troopers, so they may have somebody that's in a very limited amount of road system with a vehicle, and the vehicle doesn't get a lot of mileage. Whereas they might then have troopers that are in the Matsu and they get a lot of mileage. So that's why they look at those, either side of that standard, the years or the actual mileage, because both denote wear. And back to the manufacturers, supporting the vehicle, it's really that 10 years after which, and it depends upon what the vehicle, vehicles are made generally it can be as little as 4 to sometimes 9, 10, or even longer, where their vehicle's essentially the same. They'll change some headlights and that, but the important parts of the vehicle, like the engines and the things that are needed to maintain them, well, once they stop making that vehicle type, like body and the engine that went into it, well, 10 years beyond that point is when you're going to have a very difficult time to find parts typically. So that's why they use the years and the mileage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And again, I just want to emphasize, the land use decisions that we make affect every other part of our city's operation. And that does include the amount of vehicle miles that we have to make everybody drive. So, I mean, that's not something that's beyond the police department's control, but it is just an observation I want to put on the table. The other question I had on vehicles, so you mentioned, and this is generally true, newer vehicles are more fuel efficient. However, the industry has really shifted to basically making sedan and smaller vehicles not available, not popular, and only really at low price points, like a Scion, for example. So to the extent that we're moving as a society more toward larger cars, crossovers, SUVs, I guess I wonder, when you guys are deciding what to purchase, are you really even looking at sedans anymore, or are you really just looking at larger SUV vehicles?
So the industry is, just like you said, really gone to SUVs. To my knowledge, the only real police vehicle that's offered in a sedan format right now is the Charger. And Dodge hasn't said this, but I have it on good authority, or Stellantis, that they're no longer going to make the Charger after this year. And they've gone full into the Durango. They're also going to have some other vehicles coming out that they won't tell us what the names are. For instance, Ford is going to come out with a Mach-E police vehicle. But the Mach-E is basically like a crossover. It looks bigger than a sedan. It's sort of that bubble shape. But all-wheel drive is the other thing. The law enforcement has not uniformly, but to a large extent moved to all-wheel drive for a number of reasons. And most sedans, with the exception of the Charger, are not offered in all-wheel drive. But the majority of us in society and vehicles are in SUVs. Like, a lot more SUVs are being produced. Most manufacturers are not making sedans like they used to. So the same thing for the police world as well.
Just real briefly, I just, again, want to emphasize, the other parts of the way that we operate in the transportation system have costs. And I think this is a great example of where, we're not going to change the car industry. And certainly there are reasons for SUVs. There's great reasons to have all-wheel drive. But it also just means that we, the public, are paying more because of an industry preference. Thanks.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. The people do the fleet maintenance for APD. Are they dedicated just to maintaining APD's fleet, or is that a shared resource?
It's a shared resource. It's MOA fleet. So they work on Parks and Recs. They work on Public Works. They work on, there are exceptions. The fire department does their own maintenance. Solid Waste Services does their own maintenance. But for the majority of the MOA, it's MOA fleet. And they own the vehicles. We don't actually own the police vehicles.
So I think it's probably just worth noting then that when they're tied up putting in an inordinate amount of time into maintaining these older, well-loved APD vehicles, that this has operational impacts beyond just the scope of APD.
And I will say that I give all the credit in the world to MOA fleet. They are really doing everything that they possibly can for us. And I can't give enough credit for how much work they're putting in to try to keep us on the road.
I have a couple more people in the queue, and then we probably need to move on at some point so we have the time for the other speakers today. Mr. Voland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I want to echo Anna's point that there is an increased emergency response cost to a land use pattern of suburban sprawl or rural sprawl, as opposed to infill density multifamily. And I think we need to kind of keep that at the forefront of our minds when we are working on land use issues, and also when we are, supporting our emergency responders. And I want to go even further down that track, thinking of fleet, building out our fleet. What's it going to take to get some cool tactical e-bikes for APD and have you all enforce the trails? Because I hear a lot from constituents about wanting more speed enforcement on the trails, safety enforcement on the trails throughout town. So I would love to build that out into your fleet as well.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I just want to kind of slightly or gently rebut the argument that the land use pattern conversation is really germane at this point in the Anchorage Bowl. 25 years ago, we might have been able to change the pattern in such a way that we didn't develop to every corner of the flatlands of our municipality, but we're there now. And unless we're talking about, the Joni Mitchell approach of picking up a parking lot to save paradise, basically we have to patrol where we are, and where we are is sprawled. And so undoing that isn't realistic in the context of our future development patterns. The only reality is that we might get more dense in certain areas where the sprawl has occurred, which doesn't have a net difference on the mileage we have to patrol to provide inside of at least a police service area the services that people have come to expect and really we all want for our own homes. And so I just want to push back gently on that idea, because in an ideal world, a perfect platonic world, it's absolutely true. We've just built to the edges of our built environment. If there's conversation about that bridge again, it's a disaster, then that's a reality of that conversation, but we'll have to be making that case to the Matsu Borough. And so, which in any universe, I don't support that. But that said, I would just like to point out that both our fleet and our radio shop are really busy, and they are both suffering from the same labor shortage that everybody is everywhere, including in the police, including in the fire, including in all the other departments. And so that backup is endemic across our system right now. And while we don't desire to do contracts, I think we did issue at least one contract for some of this backup work. Again, it's not desirable. It's better to have employees getting paid fair market wages than pay exploitive contract fees to third-party contractors, 3 times what we would pay our workforce. But that said, this area isn't kind of in the red zone of what we have to focus on from a labor force perspective.
Thank you. And just a final comment that I would like to have a conversation offline to talk about what some ideas and sort of next steps could be from your perspective, so that that's informed from you. Any final comments before we end on this topic or any other topic? No, good. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentation. Anchorage Fire Department, would you like to come up and give us some updates for us? Thanks so much for being here. You have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Doug Schrage, for the record, Anchorage Fire Chief. I'm joined by Assistant Chief of EMS, Ben Lewis. And I'm just here to present a general update on what I think are items of interest to the Assembly. First of all, we have our second Fire Academy for 2023 is planned to begin in early October. Job offers are in the process of going out to 10 applicants who have been through the entire screening process. We currently, in the fire department, 16 employees have left year to date this year, which is about typical for most years. We have 2 resignations in hand, so we expect that number to go up just a little bit more. And there are rumors of at least 2 others that expect to leave before the end of the year. We presently have 5 vacancies in the firefighter ranks. When we add in the 2 expected vacancies and a couple of predicted or rumored vacancies, and the expectation that 1% or 10% will wash out of the academy, that brings us to our academy of 10. And this academy that will be starting next month is strictly going to be EMTs and paramedics, because there is not enough time left in the balance of this year to do both firefighter training and medical training. We will be hiring those who are already licensed or certified as paramedics and EMTs. Moving on to a different topic, also in the area of hiring. As you know, there was a first quarter budget revision, which provided us with funding to hire a PIO, Public Information Officer. We have just, that opening has just closed. We received 10 applications. We're in the process of screening those applicants, and hopefully we'll bring somebody on board before the end of this year. Similarly, we were approved in this year's operating budget to hire an additional 2 inspectors in order to bring us into better compliance with our performance measures in fire prevention. We are currently accepting applications for those positions. I wanted to give a brief update about our fleet status. Unlike our esteemed colleagues in the police department, we are very grateful to be we're on track to get back onto our regular replacement schedule. It'll be 2 years because it takes about 30 months for the apparatus manufacturers to produce a new fire truck or engine. In the recent weeks, we put trucks 3 and 5 into service, and those are now responding to calls. Those replace our oldest and most unreliable pieces of equipment. We also have 2 additional trucks on order that will replace trucks 12 and our reserve apparatus. We have no suitable reserves right now. We also have on order, also expected to arrive in 2025, is 5 additional engines, and plus 2 more, 1 each for Girdwood and Chugiak. They are piggybacking onto the pricing that we negotiated because we're ordering so many pieces of equipment at the same time. And this gets us back close to our regular replacement schedule. Our predicted lifespan for an engine or truck is 20 years, followed by 5 years of reserve service. But because over the last decade or so, we've taken a few bond holidays and we didn't keep up with our replacement schedule. As you know, we've fallen behind. And then the last little bit of news that I have to share is we have just begun operationalizing a partial reorganization of the executive levels of the fire department. And we're now beginning going through the process of institutionalizing our organizational changes. That's what I have prepared for you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yep, I have a few. Let's start with Mr. Constant, then go to Mr. Johnson.
Mine is more of a philosophical question. You talked about a bond holiday, and my question is, and you don't have to answer it, is it a holiday if you were forced to take it against your will? And to that point, much like the previous conversation, I think we have a duty to ensure that our equipment is up to speed and able to be manned and staffed by the professionals that we are trying to employ. So, Chief, I had the, I think, misfortune of seeing a recruitment video from the city of Tacoma that featured a recently departed Anchorage firefighter as their poster child. Have you seen that video?
I have, yes.
It's almost as if regional fire departments are literally targeting our trained firefighters to bring them down there because we give such a bad deal that it's an easy recruitment tactic by fire departments out of state. And so this gets back to the arguments about some kind of a pension program, compensation that's competitive with regional other fire departments, and maybe having some analysis for us of what people in the Northwest are getting paid and what their benefits are. Could be a document we could see at some point in the future, so we could kind of have the obvious question answered for us. Because after seeing that video with Jeff, like heartbreaking, right? Our own people we just recently trained being used to recruit our firefighters down there because they can get a better deal.
May I respond? Thank you. So to put a slightly finer point on it, the fire departments in the Pacific Northwest are not just recruiting our employees, but more specifically, they're recruiting our employees that are at about that 5-year time frame in their career. Because by that time, they've been highly trained by us. They have accrued a certain amount of experience, and their retirement benefits under the PERS system are now portable at 5 years. And those are the people that Tacoma, Bellevue, Tukwila, Snow City, all those fire departments in the Pacific Northwest they're headhunting our employees. Our pay and benefits are comparable, but what is missing is the defined benefit pension, and that is same as the police department. That's one of the reasons that our employees are leaving. So far this year, I mentioned that we've had 16 people leave the department. 8 of those are pre-retirement. In other words, people that left before they would reach what would have been a pension age or time. And 5 of them are paramedics, our most highly qualified and sought after employees. We simply aren't able to recruit enough paramedics to come work in our system. The talent pool in Alaska isn't sufficient, and people from outside the state, by and large, don't want to come here. So we're competing with fire departments throughout the country for paramedics. We've discovered a very successful program managed by Chief Lewis, where we are actually taking our good EMTs who have a solid emergency medical background, and we are sponsoring them to go to paramedic school. We pay the full costs of sending them to paramedic school. And with one exception, maybe 2, everybody that we have done that has turned out to be loyal, high-performing, long-serving employees. And that's a program that we intend to continue. We presently have 8 employees who are on various stages of either going to, are currently in, or have just returned and are waiting for approval from their paramedic schooling. And we've had 11 since 2021. that have completed it.
I almost had a heart attack recently, and a proverbial heart attack, not a call in heart attack. But when I noticed one of our newer firefighters just left the state, and it turned out he was down in paramedic school, Cole. And so I'm really glad to see that we are doing that, and we need to do whatever we can to get them in, get them up, and keep them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. So I recall AFD was awarded a grant, I think around $4 million, that amongst other things would create a new position dedicated to wildland firefighting. I was wondering if you could give us an update on filling that position or if it's been created as of yet.
Happy to. Thank you for the question. Yes, so we we are the recipients of a $4 million congressionally directed spending funding line. These are federal dollars managed by the U.S. Forest Service, brought to us because of the efforts of Senator Murkowski. And the purpose is to create a 4-year wildland management program. We closed our wildfire mitigation office in 2008, and very little work has been done to manage the wildland environment or our own preparation in the intervening years. We are combining that with the $1 million in ARPA funding that we received to turn it into a 5-year, $5 million program. We have received permission to recruit for and hire a wildland management officer. This will be somebody that we envision will come from outside the fire department with an extensive background and expertise in wildland management. There may be internal employees who have an interest and are eligible for it, but there's a lot of expertise outside the department. So we hope to get that announced and start accepting applications soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. Along those lines, the wildfire and then a couple of budget questions. So just to confirm, there was $938,000 that was allocated to the fire department that was supposed to be matching funds, I believe, for what ended up being that federal money that didn't need a match. Can you remind me, is that being repurposed already, or is that something AFD is planning to use?
Yes, that's the $1 million that I spoke of, the ARPA funding. It is true. We initially were told when we were going through the application process that there would be a match required for the USDA grant. It turns out that when the grant was executed, it didn't include that. We also learned that we would be able to back charge from the date of our application, that we could begin spending some of that money and then apply some of it to the grant. So we've been doing that. We've been spending it down. There are also some purchases that the grant is not eligible for. So we can't use the grant for equipment and vehicles, for example. So that's what we're using some of that ARPA money for.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question, this is not ARPA related. In the alcohol tax appropriations for this year, there was $100,000 for purchasing PFAS, or basically equipment that doesn't have PFAS. And from what I saw, that money has not been expended yet, or it's not showing up in SAP. So I just wanted to check the status of that and if there's any hiccups that you guys are running into, because that type of funding goes back in the fund at the end of the year. So just making sure it's going where it's supposed to.
Thank you for the question and the follow-up. We went through an extensive evaluation and trial period. We obtained different garments from different manufacturers and tried them out. We're currently in the invitation we're accepting bids. There's an ITB that's been published, and we expect to make the purchase before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Thanks. I don't see any other. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. A couple more questions for you in two parts. One, how many academies, we're in the budget process now. How many academies are you looking for next year?
We're looking to do one next year, starting in January. The recruitment that we just completed, we're going to be selecting the candidates for both this year's second academy and next year's academy. So we've already selected the people for the January academy.
So if you are seeing, I guess you're seeing a standard, you said, amount of people leaving this year. The number was somewhere around 8 to 10 or 16?
18. 18 is our.
So that's
normal.
standard. So you aren't anticipating the need to fill extra?
I am anticipating the need to fill extra, but we don't know what that number is. Every year I do a survey where we ask people to report their expected retirement date. The information we're getting doesn't seem right to us. We know that in the next 2 years, we will have about 100 employees who will reach the 25-year mark. Most of those are PERS Tier 3 or better employees. Well, they're Tier 3 employees, which means in the next 2 years, about 100 people will reach their fully funded pension. We know they're going to leave. Some of them may stay 1 or 2 years further, but we don't know which year or how many. So for planning purposes, we're planning on the one academy of about 20 in January. Again, expecting a 10% washout. That'll put 18 on the job, which will meet our normal expected attrition. If more leave than what we're prepared for, then we'll adjust at that time.
So I guess the note to members is that there is a kind of a cliff coming, and they're being moderate about their request, but we'll have some duty to figure that out in the not too distant future. So second is more of philosophical conversation, and I haven't had this with the members. I've had it briefly with you, Chief, and maybe one member. I was on a trip last month, and I went back where I grew up, and there's this great little canyon I went up, and it's called Sea Canyon, San Luis Obispo, and I was very impressed with how they managed fire. And this didn't exist when I was there, but they have a canyon that's so narrow, there's one way in and really barely one way out on the other side, because it's just a dirt road that goes for 20 miles. And it's very dry oak forest, underbrush. We don't have oak forest, but we have a very similar condition here, especially up on the upper hillside, in which we have tons of people, thousands of people living, but no real pathway out if the worst case scenario happens, like Lahaina. And so I looked at this valley, this canyon, and they had done something I had not seen before. They had created approximately every half mile on this windy dirt road, pavilion areas like plazas that were cleared for escape in place, if you will, evacuation in place. Get to these locations. You will not be burnt or melted if you get here. There's water, staged. And it dawned on me that it could possibly be, when we think about solutions for the hillside and fire, that we don't think about roads out and down, but we actually think about roads up and out to places where we've staged secure locations. And so we have emergency area-wide bonding ability. And so those are area-wide funds that can be expended on such kinds of projects if they are for emergency services. Well, then it further dawned on me, we have created a new service area for Chugach State Park access, which is a recreational use that could parallel very closely to the use of emergency locations for in place, life preservation. So what that might look like in a conversation of policies down the road would be a way to sell access to the Chugach State Park, because we wouldn't just be putting in access for parking for cars. We would be providing you and all of your neighbors a place to go if the worst happens, which would save your life. And so I'm starting to chew on that. That's something hopefully the new folks, when this plan starts coming together, can at least give us a demonstration of if it's a viable option. It seems to me we would have two funding sources if we did that, which would defray the cost in a very unique way. And it might actually build a support for access to our parks where we might not otherwise have it. So just an initial conversation here about that approach.
Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great idea, by the way. Like that. Just a question with the Lahaina fires that were brought up. I was just curious, in Anchorage, that doesn't seem quite possible as far as burning up hillside. If we had I just want your opinion on whether we're ready for something like this. If we had dry conditions, a fire on the hillside, and winds, it's my guess that the winds would be blowing from the hillside towards Anchorage, and that would be the direction of fire movement. Am I way off base, or?
I think your assumption is correct. When we get strong winds, they're often from the south. They'll come over the ridge, as we saw in the McHugh Creek fire in 2016. And the wind will be pushing downhill, warming and compressing as it goes. The Lahaina fire burned from the top down. So it was a downhill wind. It was a downhill fire. And that could very much happen here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for your presentation. All right, we've got some time left for the rest of our reports. Is there someone from the Office of Emergency Management here? Wonderful. Hi, welcome. You could state your name for the record, and you have the floor to do an update for us. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my name is Sean McKenzie. I'm an emergency programs manager at the Office of Emergency Management. I'm also a liaison officer at the Emergency Operations Center. So Director Amanda Loach is not here today. She's meeting with FEMA in the lower 48, discussing supply chain management issues during an emergency. So only have a couple items for the group. First of all, Amanda might have mentioned the tsunami study that was going to be released on August 16th during the last meeting. So that actually happened. The official name, Upper Cook Inlet Tsunami Study, was released. And for those of you who saw it, was covered fairly well by the local media and social media outlets. There's a couple things in there, but one of the big ones is that the notion that Anchorage cannot have a tsunami after an earthquake was proven false by the researchers. In a nutshell, if there is a high tide that corresponds with a tsunami, then the areas that are in low-lying areas of Anchorage, primarily around rivers, lagoons, access to the Cook Inlet, those areas can in fact get inundated by a tsunami if it's a rare occurrence, but if it occurs during a high tide. So those researchers will be here in the Anchorage-Girdwood area in October. The scientists who did the study, they're having a community, they're meeting at the Girdwood Community Center, October 17th, 6:30 to 8:30. And here in Anchorage at the Lusac Library, October 19th and October 20th, 6 to 8 p.m. The meetings are open to the public, and they have an excellent presentation on the results of their study, how they came to their conclusions, and they're available for question and answer, and that is open to the public. Second item, there was a late minute availability of cybersecurity money that was from the federal government administered by the state. At the end of the month, the Office of Emergency Management worked with our partners and submitted 2 applications, one on behalf of us and the municipality IT, as well as one on behalf of AWU. I saw on the legislative priorities that the committee is one of the items is a 10-year strategic plan on public safety, and the Office of Emergency Management is certainly looking forward to help out in any way we can with that. For planned events in September, you may already know, is National Preparedness Month. So we're working with the local media and with social media to post information and increase public visibility on individual preparedness for in the event of a disaster. The second thing that's happening in September that's interesting, next week on Tuesday and Wednesday, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, we have been working with the continuity planners throughout the municipality. These are the folks that plan for a disaster in the different departments, divisions, and offices. Essentially, how would they provide essential services during an emergency? And so we have consultants from Tidal Basin Consulting coming to Anchorage to give 2 workshops, identical workshops for our continuity planners, and is funded through a grant from the state of Alaska. So we're looking forward to that. And then finally, for those of you who haven't been to the Emergency Operations Center, the director wanted me to extend an invitation. We would love to give anyone a tour of the facility, as well as a briefing, kind of a 101 on what we do when a disaster happens. So that concludes my update, Mr. Chairman. Subject to any questions. Thanks.
Mr. Constant.
How's your staffing level?
So we have the director. The director has 3 emergency program managers, myself and 2 others. And then we have 2 disaster response coordinators who help with recovering funds after disaster. and then a finance person. So that level is significantly higher than it was, in 2018 after the earthquake, which is great. And I know the director has had informal conversations about bringing another person on, primarily grant funded with a match from the municipality. But I think those discussions are still ongoing.
So generally the positions are filled.
Yes, and I forgot to mention, we do have an intern as well, grant funded. He's finishing his internship this month. However, we've gotten another 6-month availability for an intern, so we posted and advertised for that as well. So it's much, much brighter here in the recent years than it was before the earthquake.
Mr. Cross.
Yeah, less of a question, but more of a thought process is this most recent tsunami study and how some of those results affect not just some slated areas of development in Anchorage, but obviously the port project and stuff. I'm kind of curious on how this study is, how that information is being conveyed and whether or not it's being paid attention to on some of our larger projects that we have, if it's either supports or changes the circumstance surrounding some of our larger developments. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Mr. Martinez, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the update, appreciate the report for today. As we move into September 15th, I wanted to remind folks that September 15th is the start of Hispanic Heritage Month, which really raises the sector and the profile of language access, which I wanted to remind emergency services and all of our different departments that gave reports today that is a critical component of our execution of high quality, accessible municipal services to the public, the language access plan. And just to flag that Member Rivera and I are working and are introducing an item that speaks to language access for the municipality. So I'm encouraging all of the different departments that spoke today to have that on your radar. I'm sure there's great work happening on that front. Let's continue to do good work on the language access, but as we get into Hispanic Heritage Month, consider all those diverse members of our community with respect to recruitment and the opportunity to put good information out there in the languages that are accessible to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Any other questions? Doesn't appear so. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think finally, do we have anybody from the Department of Law here? I don't think I've seen anyone. Okay. Then moving on to audience participation. Is there anybody from the public who'd like to speak? In the audience, is there anybody? Doesn't appear so. Is there anyone on the phone who would like to speak? If so, please unmute yourself. Is it *6? Is there anybody on the phone who would like to speak at this time? Hello? Yep, we can hear you. If you could state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. You can begin. Sir, we're having a very difficult time hearing you. If you could try to adjust your audio in some way. I don't think that we can hear you at this point. Can you try to adjust your audio in some way? Actually, that's better. Why don't you start again?
I'm Billy Hinthorn from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I was just calling in. I wanted to state, I saw that Chief Curl basically said, because he has the ability to release footage of like body-worn cameras, it's transparent, and that's what the Department of Police is trying to do. I just find issue with that, considering that Chief Curl and the rest of the police officers have, I guess you could say, conflicting interests with the public. And so I really feel like a matter of automatic release for the public to see what happens with these with these cameras is more beneficial because he's not a member of the public in that sense. He has different interests than we do. Part of that is to do PR for the police, even when it opposes our interests. So it's not acceptable, and I don't think that he's being serious when he does that. We, as a people, paid for these body cameras. We told y'all to get them. So it's not up to the chief of police, the robot, to basically put these videos out when it's, acceptable or convenient for them. Because what's gonna end up happening is that whenever it makes the police look good, they're gonna of course they're gonna roll out these videos, but whenever it makes them look bad, they're gonna use excuses to not do it. So it's just one more excuse for them to not be accountable to us, one more excuse for them not to be transparent, and we can see right through it. At least they put out a timeline, and we will see how else it goes. That's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else on the phone who'd like to speak at this time? Star 6 to unmute. Okay, hearing. Oh, yep, we can hear you. If you could state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Michael Patterson. I live on AU chair of the rest of the committee for today. I'm also an organizer of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I do appreciate that at least something was said about they're going to have a timeline that's going to be released next month. I really just want to ask, is that a hard yes to a public timeline? Because my issue is that for the last 2 years, we've been told, oh, we're going to get them at the end of 2021. Oh, we're going to get them at the end of 2022. And it seems every single time we're told that there's some amorphous point in time that we're supposed to get these body cameras, that it just keeps getting pushed back. And I really think just a basic concept of accountability comes down to the Chief Carl needs to release a public timeline that officially states when we're getting the body cameras. And I also think the public is intelligent enough and smart enough to understand that, yes, if you roll out these 30 cameras and there's some issue with them, if the police communicate that issue with us, the public would actually appreciate that and say, oh, okay, something happened. There's something wrong with the cloud storage. There's something wrong with the cameras. They don't work in winter very well. And, I think the public is smart enough to give a lot of slack. But honestly, I think at the same time, the police have earned a lot of trust with the public with this process. I think there's been a deliberate effort to stall the deployment of body cameras. And, furthermore, what the previous speaker said, the intent of the voters was to have an automatic release policy when it comes to body cameras. And over the last couple of years, really the municipality's argument has been, well, we don't want to invade people's privacy because of the privacy clause in the Constitution. But I have a really difficult time actually thinking that when that clause was put in the Constitution, that it was meant to protect government officials from being held accountable, being forced to being transparent. And also the idea in the current policy with the automatic release, it says they won't release it if it's a court proceeding, which a lot of times families or people who are assaulted by the police or have loved ones killed by the police, they sue. It also says that public record, body camera footage would be subject to public records processes, but we all know that APD has a really bad history of charging people thousands of dollars. For example, Bashar Hassan's family was charged over $5,000 to get that dash cam footage. And I think that is simply just extortion. And also the fact that in the last line of that policy, when it comes to automatic release of body camera recording, it says the chief can just arbitrarily release it, which means to me that he can just release it no matter what. And the idea being that if something's good for the police, I don't think you'll have to go through a court proceeding. I don't think you'll have to go through a public records process. If something's bad for the police, well, there's a court proceeding now. You have to wait. Oh, you have to go through the public records request, which public records request costs thousands of dollars, and that's depending on the timeline. So really, my question to Deputy Chief Cade is that for this public, is this timeline that is that you said is coming out next month?
Sir,
Mr. Chair.
Sir, your time is expired. I just want to make sure you finalize your point. But your time has expired. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else on the phone who'd like to speak at this time? You can *6 to unmute. Okay. Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all for being here.